States are often called the laboratories of democracy, and states with Republican governors are being subjected to some of the worst test policies imaginable. The Republicans want to know if their policies can work on a national stage, so they're testing them state by state on smaller levels. Joining me now to explain what's happening is Howard Nations. You know, Howard, you've covered the story in the past about the Republicans' effort to try to dismantle democracy by state, basically, is kind of the topic. And there was a great article about Bobby Jindal. Pick that up a little bit. I think it ties right into this notion.
Yeah, the Republicans who have such major control now are always railing against wealth redistribution. And, you know, our founding fathers said that the states should be laboratories of democracy, but the Republican governors now, especially those that have their eye on the White House, are turning it into laboratories of plutocracy, which is society ruled by the minority of the wealthiest citizens. And what they're doing is they're accomplishing that by cutting taxes on the rich and cutting education and benefits to the poor. And the excellent example of that is on Bobby Jindal in Louisiana. When he was elected in 2008, there was a $1 billion surplus. There were very high oil prices. There was a lot of federal money in the state as a result of hurricane relief. Since Jindal, as soon as he became governor, he instituted the highest tax cut in Louisiana history. He cut government. He cut public sector economy. He supported the private sector economy. He gave tax credits like you wouldn't believe, and exemptions to the rich, resulting in a $1 billion wealth redistribution from the middle class and the poor and the government to the richest people in Louisiana. And he offset that with cuts to the middle class and the poor. Louisiana education has had the largest cut in the country, with more than 1,000 fewer faculty members in their campus system. And imagine this, a 40% cut to the budget of Louisiana State University, and cuts to healthcare
but now
totaling
your
$1
position,
billion.
your position, Howard, has always been that this is happening state by state.
Oh, yeah.
And Bobby Jindal is just a microcosm of what the Republicans are doing state by state. In other words, you could take what you just described and superimpose it on Florida, Alabama,
Sure.
Mississippi, Georgia, certainly any of the southern states. We're seeing that.
Sure.
What if you were to just to say how do we describe this dismantling agenda? Now that I think you pointed out, I think at this point they control about 69 of 99 different state chambers. I mean,
Right.
it's amazing. So how do they use that to go state by state under the Koch brother plan and just dismantle democracy in a way that fits them?
Well, the other things they're doing besides just doing away with taxes on the rich is they're transferring money to the rich, and to make up for it, they're raiding their reserves. They have trust fund reserves in states to cover infrastructure and reserves for additional low-income and elderly people to help them out. All those things are just being raided completely. So that
and you're saying that's state by state they're doing.
That's state by state,
okay.
And it's just the way they're doing business now. And if you could look further at what happened with Sam Brownback in Kansas, you know, he was a senator for the longest time, and when he decided he became the governor of Kansas, and he decided to make Kansas the ground zero for testing the Republican economic theory. The first thing he did, he exempted 191,000 businesses from income tax. He cut taxes in half to the individuals. He planned to move it down to zero. He said we're going to have zero state income tax. His theory, the Republican theory, was we'll cut taxes, we'll grow the economy, we'll attract new businesses. He cut spending on education. Here's that same pattern you saw in Louisiana. He cut spending on education by $200 million, and then he had to cut social services to cover a total of $800 million in lost tax revenues. But he kept giving tax credits and amnesty to the companies. And the result was the state credit rating was lowered.
Okay, now, if I follow Howard Nations, you've talked about this over the years, and you've basically said that if you're living in a Republican-controlled state where they're controlling the legislature, they're controlling the governors, you can count on exactly what you just described taking place in your state. In other words, if at some point you're able to control 28 or 30 of the 50 states in the country, then all of a sudden you have left. It's kind of like a dog moving up to a fire hydrant. This is the Republican equivalent of that. That you now have your imprint of your ideology that covers more than 50% of the states. And you've been talking about this a long time. Do you see it backing down at all, or is it getting worse?
No, it's absolutely getting worse. When you saw in Wisconsin, for example, they're also taking on labor unions now and labor organizing, and they're taking them on in the public sector. They've made education the target. And what happened in Wisconsin has set a good example for other Republican governors who have, especially those with presidential aspirations. Scott Walker, as you know, took on the unions in the public sector, and then now he's backed off from it, and he wants to run for president, and he's afraid he's not going to be able to do something on a national basis. He certainly won't get the support of the Koch brothers unless he continues his union battle.
Now, Howard, that's a great point. Does this agenda that Rick Scott or Bobby Jindal or Chris Christie, does this agenda translate to a national agenda in a national presidential race? That's what I'm curious about.
Absolutely. Walker now, he's cut $300 million from state university system. You see the pattern here?
Yes.
It's happening everywhere. He cut $300 million from state university system, no increase in public education, increased voucher support for private and religious schools at the taxpayers' expense. And just as they did in LSU, he cut 13% from the University of Wisconsin budget. So you see these same things are happening everywhere you go. And we know that he's pandering to the Koch brothers trying to get their support for a presidential run.
Right. Now, the great article in Alternet about this very thing that you're talking about,
Right.
I think you're discussing parts of that article that I think are critical that people understand, that this is happening right under our noses, right. And we're not even aware of it because, one state, we're not paying attention so much to what, for example, Louisiana is doing if we live in Georgia. We're not paying attention to what Georgia's doing if we live in Florida. But it's all coalescing to create this new dismantling of what we used to call old-time democracy in this new invitation to really creepy right-wing Republican politics. Howard, thank you for joining me. It's an important story. I agree with you. It's going to get worse before it gets better. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Mike.